Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandy Chen. I'm an employment lawyer here at Samfiru, Tumarkin in our Vancouver office. Welcome, everyone, to our weekly YouTube and Facebook live show. Purpose of the show is to answer questions about employment law. So if you guys type in, your questions in the box in front of you there, I should be able to see them on my screen here. I can't see you, but you can see me. So I'll be here for the next 29 minutes to answer any and all questions related to employment law, related to, vaccinations has been a very popular topic recently. So feel free to shoot your questions away as they come. And I'll do my best to get through all of them. These sessions have been pretty busy for the last few weeks because of all the stuff that's happening with COVID. It seems like there's a new development basically every week. BC's got these past. I think on Monday, vaccine passports came into effect here. I know Ontario is also implementing them as well. So before we get started on the questions, I have for any viewers in Ontario, I just want to give, for all the viewers in Ontario, a quick heads up as to what's happening in terms of employment law in Ontario. So recently, today, I think, the Ontario government has announced that it is extending the IDEL, the Infectious Disease Emergency Leave, under the Employment Standards Act. So this is the fourth time that they've extended it. What it's essentially meant to do is prevent employees who've been on temporary layoffs since last March from claiming for severance, right? Here's the important note, okay? This is the fourth time they've extended it. It's going to be extended till January 2nd of 2022. So for all viewers in Ontario, here's what you need to know. Just because the government has extended the infectious disease emergency leave, or IDEL, as we call it, doesn't mean you have to accept that temporary layoff until January. All right. If you've been sitting around since last March on a temporary layoff because of this infectious disease leave, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to accept the temporary layoff until January, just because the government's extended it. The law is that it might prevent you from claiming the minimum severance under the Employment Standards Act, but you can still claim a constructive dismissal at common law and claim for your entitlements that way. So, for example, if you've been with a company for 30 years and they put you on a temporary layoff last March, and they're saying, okay, the government has said we can do this, right? And they've extended this leave until January 2nd, 2022. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're allowed to do it under the common law. So you might be able to claim up for up to 22, up to 2 years pay if you've just been sitting on a temporary layoff since last March. So that's a bit of an update for the viewers in Ontario. I think the government just announced it, I think today or maybe yesterday. It's obviously, it's meant to give employers some leeway, but the important thing for employees is to know is that just because the government has extended that leave until January doesn't mean you can't reject the layoff and claim for severance now. Obviously, that's a decision that everybody will have to make themselves, whether they're prepared to leave their employer and claim for severance or stay on the temporary layoff. Who knows? It might get extended again in January. We just don't know at this point. So just a bit of heads up for people. Again, in Ontario, BC is very different. Okay, so I see we've got some questions in the text box here. I'll try to go through them in the order that they were raised. So we've got a question from David Medeiros. David asks, can you get sent home for not wearing masks? Nobody else wears masks. Masks are a reasonable policy right now for most workplaces in order to, ensure the health and safety of employees of the workplace. So David, I would say in general, if you're refusing to wear a mask and that's the employer's policy, I would say that yes, you have to wear a mask if they ask you to wear a mask, depending on the workplace. In most workplaces, they're going to be seen as reasonable. I'm not here to debate the efficacy of whether masks prevent COVID or whether they do any good. I'm just telling you kind of what the law is. And, now, David, to your second point, if nobody else is wearing masks and they're for some reason just picking on you, that's a different story. I'd want to know the reason why that nobody else is wearing masks and they're picking on you and saying you have to wear the mask. But in general, I mean, a masking policy at work will be seen as reasonable. David, your second question is, what can you do if you're falsely accused of making threats? I mean, I would put something in writing to the employer and just deny that you're making threats, right? If they're taking disciplinary action on something that's not true, the employer cannot do that. Tanya Celeste asks, are union employees entitled to severance if they're wrongfully dismissed, if they refuse the vaccine, if it's mandated by the Ministry of Education? So I assume you work in education, Tanya. So it's a good question. It depends on the terms of your collective agreement. Especially in a unionized context, I don't want to, because it's so heavily dependent on what your union negotiated with the employer, right? So most unionized employees don't get as much severance as non-unionized employees. I've seen some collective agreements where it's actually a set amount that's negotiated by the union that you're entitled to if you get let go. The issue in your case, Tanya, is if you refuse the vaccine and the government is saying that, and the government eventually mandates it, that's going to be tough for the union to fight on your behalf. So please talk to your union rep about that. It's a lot different for unionized employees, and without seeing a copy of your collective agreements, it's very hard for me to say. I think the best advice I could give you is talk to your rep right away and see what they can do for you. As far as I know, the Ministry of Education, I know they're mandating it for, or some of the universities have mandated it, and a lot of the employees to be on campus, or even students actually do have to get the vaccine. So if your union has accepted that and they're not fighting it, it's going to be hard for you to file a grievance. But definitely talk to your union rep. Scott Latour asks, can employers legally fire employees for not getting vaccinated? So let's stay out of the unionized context. Let's talk about non-unionized employees. If you're not in a union, you don't have job protection, right? And I fielded a lot of calls in the last 2 weeks about this exact same question, Scott. The answer I have for you is yes, they can fire you for not getting vaccinated, but they have to pay you severance. Okay. But if you have some sort of reason for not getting vaccinated, and the two main ones nowadays are religious, if you have a religious exemption, or if you have a medical condition that prevents you from getting vaccinated. If you fall under either of those two categories, your job could be protected, notwithstanding that you're not in a union. So I think, Scott, I mean, without knowing more about your workplace or why, or the reason why someone's not getting vaccinated, I think the only general answer I can give you is if you refuse to be vaccinated, the employer can fire you, but they're going to have to pay you severance. And if you've been with the company for 35 years, it's going to be quite a bit of severance that they will owe you. So hopefully, Scott, that answers your question. I'm sorry to be vague, but it's heavily dependent on the workplace, and it's dependent on the reason why someone is not getting the vaccine. Okay, so Stan Ronald asks, I am in healthcare. On October 26th, all healthcare work are to be vaccinated. Number one, am I entitled to a severance package? And number two, can I sue for wrongful termination? Stan, if you're in a union, talk to your union rep. A lot of healthcare workers I know are in unions. If you're not in a union, I'm because the government has come in and said that healthcare workers have to be vaccinated, it's going to have to go to the courts as to whether you're going to be entitled to severance. I tend to lean on the side of they can't force you to get it. The counter argument is that the government has said healthcare workers have to get it. So my advice to you, Stan, is if you're in a union, talk to your union rep. If you're not in a union, come talk to me after this, okay? Because your situation is a bit tricky. You're in a field where the government has said that people have to get vaccinated. So it's not necessarily as black and white as do they have to pay you severance. Tanya asks, are OECTA employees entitled to severance negotiated by the union if Ministry of Education mandates vaccine and refuses it? I can't answer that, Tanya. I'm sorry. You're going to have to talk to your union rep about it. The issue will be whether the union's going to oppose that vaccine mandate. As far as I know, I don't think they have. You could be put on a leave, and there's certain clauses in the collective agreement that will state whether you get severance under certain situations or not. So please talk to your union rep, Tanya. I'm sorry I can't help you more with that one. Okay. So GC Gerd asks, if a healthcare worker has to be vaccinated, but this healthcare worker only sees patients by video and is not in contact with other healthcare workers, can they really enforce it? That's a good question, GC. I've had a similar person. I've talked to a person similar to your situation, not in healthcare, but that doesn't seem reasonable to me. Okay, if you're working remote, right, and you're not in contact with any patients or other employees, that doesn't seem reasonable to me. Again, it depends on if you're in a union or not. I can tell you, if you're not in a union and they try to force it on you, you're likely going to be, if they let you go, you're likely going to be entitled to severance. Again, if you give me some more details on the nature of your job, and why is it that this healthcare worker can well, it sounds like that he or she is just working from home. Okay, Ingrid Matheson is asking, I'm in Montreal. So Ingrid, I'm going to refrain from answering questions in Quebec. It's a whole different system out there. I'm not gonna try to pretend that I understand or know the law very well out there in Quebec. It's a different legal system, or slightly different. It's a civil system, as you know. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer that one for you. I'm licensed in BC. I can answer questions for people working in BC. Ontario, I do know generally the law there, but Quebec, I'm going to have to refrain from that one. Sorry about that. Rosie Aurora asks, can they refuse severance because employees are not adhering to policy? So Rosie, in your situation, there's two ways to let someone go. They can do it without cause, which means, whatever business reason, or you didn't really do anything wrong, they're letting you go. The other way is a for-cause termination. So Rosie, in your situation, it sounds like they might be refusing you severance because, or someone, maybe not you, but refusing it because someone didn't adhere to a workplace policy. It's very difficult to answer that without knowing what policy they didn't follow. It depends on the nature of the violation of the policy and how egregious it was. I can tell you in general, it's very difficult for an employer to allege cause and not pay severance. But I'd have to know more about your situation, but or this employee situation, before answering whether, simply not adhering to a policy one time, or maybe it was multiple times, can constitute just cause. Okay, so Tanya's asking, can my employer, casino of 23 years, let me go without trying to provide me with another job within? I have very high company seniority, but I haven't been called back as I work in the restaurant. Tanya, yes. I mean, unless you're in a union, you don't have job security, unfortunately, or protection of your job. Your seniority doesn't really matter in terms of the order of recall or whether they have to provide you with another job within, unfortunately. So if you're still on a temporary layoff, Tanya, you should speak, and you don't want to return. So that's the first decision I think you have to make is, do you want to go back? If you don't want to return and you just want to claim for some severance, talk to an employment lawyer, because it sounds like you've been on a layoff for quite a while. And, if at a certain point you don't really want to go back, I think it sounds like you certainly have a case to claim for severance. But no, the answer is, unfortunately, unless you're in a union, your seniority doesn't really affect the order of recall, or it doesn't give the employer an obligation to provide you another job. So Malika asks, my husband is being put on an unpaid leave because he didn't receive the vaccine and isn't planning to. Will he be able to apply for EI benefits or any financial help? He is the sole provider for the family. Sorry, I'm just scrolling back to that question. So Malika, yeah, he should apply for EI because it's not his choice that he's not working, right? So he should apply. In terms of what your husband can do, it really depends on the workplace, okay? For most workplaces, if they put you on an unpaid leave, because you didn't get the vaccine, that's a situation where you could probably claim for severance, because they're saying, leave the workplace, we're not paying you. They're basically firing him without saying he's fired, right? That the legal term is a constructive dismissal. But yes, your husband should apply for EI, Malika, and if he doesn't see himself going back, and he wants to claim for some severance money, tell him to talk to an employment lawyer. And it sounds to me like it's a constructive dismissal, which is essentially his employer firing him without saying that they're firing him, because they're putting him on an unpaid leave without his consent. Freebird asks, my employer is requesting my vaccine status. I find that to be sensitive information that I do not want to share with them. Can they reprimand me in any way for not disclosing? So guys, I have to apologize because I know a lot of my answers sound very generic, and obviously as a lawyer, I have to do that sometimes. This COVID vaccine stuff really depends on your workplace, and the law, as I'm sure everyone here has heard before, is not black and white. Freebird, in your situation, it like I said, it depends on your workplace. If you're in an office environment, right, it's not. I don't see, and everyone's working separate offices. And let's say you're working remotely half the week, I don't see why they need your vaccination status. If they fire you, you're probably going to get severance. If you're in a meat processing plant, if you're in healthcare, you're coming into close contact with people. If you're in healthcare, by the way, the government has said that everyone has to get vaccinated by, I forget the exact date, but I think sometime in October. That's a much harder case to make if you don't disclose vaccination status. Right? If you're in a field or an industry with a lot of COVID cases, or you're coming to close contact with coworkers, it's a lot harder to say no to disclosing vaccination status, because a court might see the employer as acting reasonably in asking for your status. To tie that off, just remember, and there's a lot of debate among the legal community. But I think my view on it is, unless the government has come in and said people in this field have to get the vaccine, if the employer fires you and you're not in a field where the government has said that, you're gonna get severance. You're probably entitled to severance, and your only protection for job security for non-unionized employees is if you can prove a medical or a religious exemption. There's also a recent human rights case, it's not a decision. It's called a screening decision, which means it's preliminary. But the decision, and it only came out last week, but in it, one of the adjudicators at the Human Rights Tribunal said that actually political belief, opposition, something along the lines of opposition to vaccines or views on vaccination could constitute a political belief, which is a protected ground under the Human Rights Code. So that's something else that, is out there. So certainly, that line of argument needs to be fleshed out and probably will be litigated. But that's, it's something that I thought was interesting. Jackie V asks, how long is the wait to receive legal counsel from your firm? Family member being terminated on Wednesday. This person is non-unionized. So Jackie, feel free to shoot me an email afterwards. I'm happy to talk to, I'm fairly busy this week, but next week I do have availability. Please call the number or just, email the email on the screen there. And we'll try to set you up next week. I don't know, if she's being terminated on Wednesday, if it's this Wednesday, hopefully they give her some time if they're offering her a severance package to consider the severance package. But hopefully we can talk to your family member next week. Scott Latour asks, if we are required to prove our vaccination status to our employer, does this mean all of our medical information records are no longer private? No, so vaccination status is one small part of your medical information. Everything else the employer is not entitled to, barring some, there are certain scenarios where the employer is entitled to some medical information. I'm just thinking in cases where someone's, got an injury and the employer wants to know how long they're going to be off work for. But Scott, no, vaccination status, just because they get your vaccination status doesn't mean that they have access to all your other medical stuff. They're absolutely not entitled to all the other stuff, barring some exceptional situations. Freebird says they are not offering any testing, medical, religious exemptions as a basis for returning back to the office. That's gonna be problematic for the company you're working for, Freebird. They have to offer those exemptions. If a policy doesn't allow for those exemptions, then in my view, it's illegal, right? If you have someone who legitimately can't get the vaccine because they had side effects from the first dose, or maybe they're allergic to the vaccine, and your company's policy is not even allowing exemptions for that's in my view illegal. JP Parks asks, does esoteric Christian fall in the category of religion? Christianity does fall in the category of religion. I don't know if esoteric Christian falls in the category of religion. Okay, so Becky asks, I work for a retail business that is considered essential. If provincial legislators state that essential business workers have to be vaccinated, what are my options? Good question, Becky. If the government comes in and says, employees in the retail sector have to be vaccinated, I think that's going to be a challenge for you to refuse the employer. To refuse to get vaccinated if you want to keep working. Because if that's the case, there's nothing else your company can do because the government has forced them to do it, right? It's very different than the case now where the government hasn't done that, except for healthcare workers and long-term, at least in BC, long-term care home workers. So Becky, good question. But I think in that situation, it'd be a very difficult case or very difficult to argue against getting vaccinated if you want to keep working. And I think if the government comes in and says that, I'm not sure that you could sue the employer in that case for wrongful dismissal because the government has essentially forced your company to do that. Whether that's constitutional or not is outside of the scope of employment law. I can imagine that people might challenge that if the government makes retail business workers get the COVID vaccine. But that's a wholly separate question, a completely different issue. Leslie asks, can the government mandate vaccines on private companies? Again, Leslie, that's a very good question. They can, but I suspect, depending on the company, they're gonna have to have a good reason to do it, and it might be challenged under the charter. I don't know. That's not my area of expertise, but I expect that the government has to have a damn good reason to make companies, I guess, force their employees to get vaccinations. And I haven't heard any news of them doing that. But in certain industries, in certain industries it makes sense. Healthcare, right? If the government says all law firms have to make their employees get the vaccination, I'm not sure if that's as reasonable. And I suspect that that's not an employment law question, Leslie. That's more of a constitutional, Charter of Rights question that I will leave for someone much more well versed in that subject than me. Sorry, I'm just there's too many questions coming in. Let me see if I can get through a few more. I work for, Taylor asks, I work for CN in Kamloops, BC, and they say I will be suspended without pay or terminated if I don't get my jab. Is this legal? CN, what do you do, Taylor? What's your work for them? Because I know you're probably federally regulated if you're in, rail transportation. And I know the government has come in and said that they're going to they're going to mandate vaccines for people in, air, rail, and I think marine transportation. They haven't done that yet. I think that's going to depend on the outcome of the election. Again, if you tell me the nature of your job, I'll be able to give you a better answer. So I'll take one or two more. So Natalie asked, since COVID, we have been working from home. There was limited office space. There's limited office space. They may have secured space for December. What happens if they adopt a mandatory vaccine to be in the office? Are they obliged to let me stay working from home? So Natalie, unless there's something in your contract or they've agreed to let you work from home permanently, unfortunately, most employees don't have a right to work from home. If they say to you, come back to the office and you have to be vaccinated, and you say, no, I'm not going to get vaccinated, and they fire you, they're going to probably have to pay you severance, Natalie. As I was saying before, you as an office worker, non-unionized, don't have a right to your job. But to me, it sounds like, if you can work from home, why don't they let you stay working from home? Why do you have to get the vaccine? So in your situation, Natalie, I would say they can let you go, but they're probably going to have to pay you some severance money. David asks, and this is the last question I'll take. Sorry, guys. Last question I'll take from David. Can employees all get together and say no to vaccination, then force companies to not reinforce crazy rules? What can the company do if everyone says no? They shut down. Yeah, David, you're obviously that's the free market argument, right? If the company does something that a lot of people don't like and everybody leaves, you're kind of forcing them to change based on the market, not based on the law. So certainly you can do that if you can get enough people together. But just keep in mind, if you resign, you're not going to be entitled to severance. So guys, I'm very sorry. There's a lot more questions, and I know I didn't get through all of them. I'll be back in 2 weeks. My colleague, I think, is back tomorrow or Monday. Don't quote me on that, but someone will be back in the next few days or early next week. These sessions happen once a week. So please do come either tomorrow or Monday to the session. And my colleague will try to get through any questions that were missed today. So I hope everybody has a lovely weekend. And again, thanks for attending. And my apologies for not being able to get through everybody today.